What if I told you that the person you believe yourself to be is an elaborate fiction, a masterpiece of deception so convincing that even you have forgotten it's a performance? What if the very personality you defend, the identity you're so sure is you, is actually a sophisticated survival mechanism that's been running your life on autopilot for decades? Right now, as you're watching this, you're not experiencing your authentic self. You're experiencing what I call the palimpsest personality, a brilliant forgery written over the original text of who you truly are. And the most tragic part, you've become so identified with this false self that you'll fight to protect it even as it slowly suffocates your soul. This isn't another self-help video promising quick fixes or shallow affirmations. This is an existential audit, a forensic examination of the psychological crime scene that is your current identity. We're going to dig through the archaeological layers of your psyche, uncover the original you that's been buried beneath decades of conditioning, and expose the hidden forces that have been writing your life story without your conscious consent. Here's the brutal truth. Most people will die without ever meeting themselves. They'll spend their entire lives performing a character they inherited from their childhood trauma, their family dynamics, their cultural programming, and their survival instincts. They'll mistake this performance for authenticity and wonder why they feel so empty, so disconnected, so fundamentally alone, even when surrounded by people who love them. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through what Carl Jung called the most terrifying thing you can do. Meet yourself without the masks, without the stories, without the comfortable lies you've been telling yourself about who you are. We'll journey through 4 acts of psychological archaeology, using tools from the greatest depth psychologists in history to excavate your authentic nature, from beneath the rubble of who you think you're supposed to be. But before we begin this descent into the depths of your psyche, subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Why? Because what you're about to discover will fundamentally alter your relationship with yourself, and you're going to want to return to these insights again and again as you begin the most important work of your life, becoming who you actually are. Fair warning, Act 3 will reveal why your current personality might be the most brilliant survival strategy ever devised, and Act 4 will give you specific tools to begin excavating your buried authentic self. But first, we need to understand what we're really looking for. In medieval times, parchment was so precious that scribes would scrape away old text and write new words over the faded remains. These recycled manuscripts were called palimpsests. What they didn't realize was that the original text, though seemingly erased, could still be recovered using the right techniques. Your soul is a palimpsest. Somewhere beneath the layers of who you've become lies the original text of who you are. Not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expected you to become, not who your trauma forced you to pretend to be for survival, but who you were before the world got its hands on you and began its relentless editing process. Close your eyes for a moment and try to remember the last time you felt completely yourself. Not performing, not managing anyone's expectations, not worried about being judged or misunderstood, just purely, authentically you. Can you remember? If you're like most people, you'll have to go back to early childhood, maybe age 4 or 5. Before you learn to split yourself in two, the real you and the acceptable you, what happened to that original self? Where did it go? The tragic answer is that it didn't go anywhere. It was systematically trained out of you through a process so gradual, so well-intentioned, so necessary for survival, that you didn't even notice it happening. Layer by layer, year by year, the original text of your essence was written over, with instructions on how to be lovable, how to be safe, how to be successful according to other people's definitions. Friedrich Nietzsche called this process the herd instinct, the way society domesticates the wild, authentic nature of the individual. Carl Jung termed it the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social situations that eventually becomes fused with our identity. George Gurdjieff described it as false personality, a sophisticated mechanical response system that runs our lives while our true essence remains dormant. But here's what these depth psychologists understood that modern psychology often misses. This false self isn't evil or wrong. It's a masterpiece of adaptation. It's your psyche's brilliant solution to an impossible problem: how to remain connected to others while maintaining some core sense of self. The tragedy isn't that you developed this adaptive personality. The tragedy is that you forgot it was an adaptation. Think about your automatic responses to stress, to conflict, to intimacy, to success, to failure. How much of your reaction is genuinely yours, and how much is a learned pattern you've inherited from your family system, your cultural conditioning, your formative experiences? When someone criticizes you, do you respond from your authentic center, or do you activate a defensive program that was installed decades ago? Your authentic self is like an ancient city buried beneath layers of subsequent civilizations. Each layer served its purpose, protected the inhabitants, allowed life to continue. But to find the original foundation, you have to be willing to excavate through all the accumulated debris of who you've become to reach who you've always been. This original self isn't some perfect, idealized version of you. It's not your higher self or your best self. It's your real self, with all its contradictions, its inconvenient desires, its socially unacceptable impulses, its raw, unfiltered responses to life. It's you that laughs too loud, cries too easily, loves too intensely, dreams too big, feels too much. Reconnecting with this original self is both the most healing and the most terrifying work you can undertake. It's healing because it ends the exhausting split between who you are and who you pretend to be. It's terrifying because it means disappointing people who prefer your false self, challenging systems that benefit from your compliance, and facing parts of yourself you've been avoiding for decades. But before you can reclaim your authentic nature, you need to understand exactly how it got buried in the first place. You need to identify the specific forces that took your original manuscript and began writing their own stories over it. Some of these forces had good intentions, others were simply trying to survive their own trauma. All of them left their mark on your psyche, and until you can see their influence clearly, you'll remain unconsciously enslaved to their programming. Every false self is a response to specific erasers, forces that require you to hide, modify, or abandon parts of your authentic nature in order to survive, to belong, to be loved. These aren't villains in your story. They're unconscious scribes, writing over your original text with their own unexamined programming, their own survival strategies, their own unhealed wounds. Picture a child, maybe this was you, bursting with natural exuberance, curiosity, emotional intensity. They express joy by dancing wildly. They process sadness by crying openly. They show love through fierce affection. They ask endless questions. They create without caring if it's good. They exist in a state of authentic response to whatever they're experiencing at the moment. Now picture the adults around this child. Well-meaning parents who learn that big emotions are dangerous, that creativity doesn't pay the bills, that questioning authority leads to punishment. Teachers are struggling to manage 30 unique individuals within a standardized system. Siblings competing for limited parental attention and resources. A culture that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. The child quickly learns, crying makes mommy anxious, so I'll learn to smile instead. Dancing wildly embarrasses daddy, so I'll learn to sit still. Asking too many questions annoys the teacher, so I'll learn to pretend I understand. Being too affectionate makes other kids uncomfortable, so I'll learn to hold back. Creating weird art gets me labeled as strange, so I'll learn to color inside the lines. Pause for a moment and think about your own childhood. What parts of your natural expression were systematically discouraged? What aspects of your authentic nature were met with anxiety, disapproval, or punishment? What qualities that you now consider flaws might actually be authentic parts of yourself that learned to hide for survival? Your family system was the first and most powerful scribe of erasure, not because your parents were malicious, but because they were unconsciously passing down the same editing they received. If your mother learned to suppress her anger to survive her own childhood, she'll unconsciously teach you that anger is dangerous. If your father learned to hide his vulnerability to avoid being hurt, he'll unconsciously model emotional unavailability as strength. This is how trauma moves through generations, not through genes but through the unconscious transmission of survival strategies. Your great-grandmother's fear of abandonment becomes your grandmother's people-pleasing, which becomes your mother's inability to set boundaries, which becomes your chronic self-sacrifice. Each generation adds another layer of adaptive programming, burying the original authentic self deeper beneath learned behaviors. But family is just the beginning. Your culture, your religion, your educational system, your peer groups, your media consumption, all of these act as systematic programmers, installing software into your psychological operating system. Be productive, not playful. Be rational, not emotional. Be successful, not authentic. Be normal, not weird. Be strong, not vulnerable. Then there are the trauma scribes, the experiences that required you to split off parts of yourself for psychological survival. The bullying that taught you to make yourself small. The betrayal that taught you not to trust. The abandonment that taught you to never need anyone. The criticism that taught you to be perfect. The violation that taught you to disconnect from your body. But some of the most damaging scribes are the subtle ones. The chronic invalidation of your emotional reality. The consistent message that your perceptions are wrong. The systematic dismissal of your intuition. The gradual erosion of your connection to your own inner knowing through gaslighting, minimization, and the privileging of external authority over internal wisdom. Eventually, you don't need external scribes anymore because you've internalized them. Your own inner critic becomes more harsh than any external judge. Your own fear of authenticity becomes more limiting than any external pressure. Your own betrayal of yourself becomes more damaging than anyone else's abandonment. But here's what's crucial to understand. Every erasure was also an adaptation. Every suppressed part of yourself was buried for a reason. Your people-pleasing personality might have prevented family conflict. Your perfectionism might have earned you love and approval. Your emotional numbness might have protected you from overwhelming pain. Your hypervigilance might have kept you safe in an unpredictable environment. The problem isn't that you developed these adaptive strategies. The problem is that you're still running them decades later, in situations where they're no longer necessary and may actually be harmful. You're still people-pleasing in relationships where conflict would create deeper intimacy. You're still perfectionist in areas where experimentation would lead to growth. You're still emotionally numb in situations where feeling would enhance your experience. So how do you identify your personal scribes of erasure? Start by noticing your automatic responses, your recurring patterns, your areas of chronic struggle. Then ask, when did I first learn to respond this way? What was I trying to avoid or achieve? What part of my authentic nature did I have to sacrifice to maintain this adaptation? This awareness is simultaneously liberating and disorienting. Because once you begin to see how much of your personality is actually adaptive programming, you might start to wonder, who am I underneath all these learned behaviors? What's left when you strip away all the strategies, all the performances, all the personas? Your current personality is not you. It's a sophisticated survival algorithm, running complex programs designed to maximize safety, love, and success according to parameters that were set decades ago. And it's so convincing, so seamlessly integrated, so identified with your sense of self that you defend it as if it were your actual identity. This might be the most disturbing realization in this entire audit. The you that you wake up as every morning, the you that makes decisions, the you that relates to others, the you that pursues goals and dreams, this isn't your authentic self. It's a character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten you're acting. Think of your personality as psychological software, a collection of programs running in the background of your consciousness. There's the people-pleasing program, activated whenever there's potential conflict. The perfectionist program, launched whenever your competence might be questioned. The withdrawal program, initiated whenever intimacy becomes too threatening. The achievement program, running whenever your worth feels in question. Right now, notice what programs are running in your own psychological operating system. As you're watching this video, what part of you is evaluating whether you agree or disagree? What part is worrying about whether this applies to you? What part is already formulating counterarguments or defenses? These aren't random thoughts. They're specific programs running specific scripts, designed to maintain specific psychological positions. But here's what's remarkable. These programs are incredibly sophisticated. They're not crude or primitive responses. They're nuanced, context-sensitive, multi-layered strategies that have been refined through years of trial and error. Your people-pleasing isn't just automatic compliance. It's a complex system that can read social dynamics, predict emotional reactions, and navigate interpersonal terrain with remarkable skill. Your personality contains unconscious genius. The part of you that learned to read your mother's mood and adjust your behavior accordingly developed extraordinary emotional intelligence. The part that learned to excel academically to earn your father's approval developed remarkable discipline and focus. The part that learned to be funny to deflect potential rejection developed sophisticated social skills and creativity. And these programs worked. They achieved their objectives. They kept you safe, got you love, helped you succeed within the parameters they were designed for. The tragedy isn't that they failed. It's that they succeeded so well that you became imprisoned by your own adaptive brilliance. But here's the problem. You're running 30-year-old software in current situations. You're using childhood survival strategies to navigate adult relationships. You're applying family system dynamics to workplace interactions. You're responding to present-moment experiences through the lens of historical programming. The perfectionist program, developed to avoid criticism and earn approval. Highly effective in academic and professional settings, but it creates chronic anxiety, prevents authentic expression, and makes genuine intimacy impossible because it requires hiding your flaws and struggles. The caretaker program, developed to maintain connection by anticipating and meeting others' needs, creates strong bonds and makes you valuable to others, but it leads to chronic resentment, loss of personal boundaries, and relationships where you're valued for what you do rather than who you are. The Achiever program, developed to create worth through external validation and success, drives remarkable accomplishments and builds impressive external identity. But it creates a constant sense of inadequacy, prevents genuine rest and enjoyment, and makes your self-worth dependent on performance. Often you're running conflicting programs simultaneously. Your autonomy program wants independence, but your connection program fears abandonment. Your authenticity program wants genuine expression, but your safety program fears rejection. Your growth program seeks new experiences, but your predictability program avoids uncertainty. This internal conflict creates chronic anxiety, decision paralysis, and the sense that you're constantly at war with yourself. The most insidious aspect of these programs is that you've fused your identity with them. You don't just run the perfectionist program. You believe you are a perfectionist. You don't just activate the people-pleasing protocol. You think being nice is your core nature. You don't just execute the achievement algorithm. You assume your worth is your productivity. And when someone suggests that these aren't your authentic nature, your programs activate defensive subroutines. But I've always been this way. This is just who I am. I can't change my personality. These aren't rational arguments. They're programmed responses designed to protect the survival strategies that your psyche believes are keeping you alive. But here's the liberating truth. If these are programs rather than your essential nature, they can be examined, updated, or even uninstalled. You are not your personality. You are the awareness that can observe these programs running, the consciousness that can choose which programs to activate, the intelligence that can write new code for your psychological operating system. So how do you begin to see your personality as a script rather than your identity? Start by catching yourself in automatic responses. When you feel triggered, instead of just reacting, pause and ask, what program is running right now? What is this response trying to achieve? What would happen if I didn't run this program? This recognition that your current personality is a collection of survival scripts rather than your authentic identity opens up an extraordinary possibility. If these programs were learned, they can be unlearned. If this character was constructed, it can be deconstructed. If these patterns were installed, they can be examined and consciously modified. But that requires doing the deep archaeological work of excavating your authentic nature from beneath these layers of adaptive programming. And that brings us to our final act, the practical tools for psychological archaeology. Now comes the practical work, the actual excavation of your authentic self from beneath the archaeological layers of adaptive programming. This isn't therapy in the traditional sense. This is depth work, using tools developed by the greatest explorers of human consciousness to systematically uncover who you are beneath who you've learned to be. Real archaeology requires patience, precision, and the right tools. You can't just bulldoze through layers of accumulated sediment. You'll destroy the very artifacts you're trying to recover. Psychological archaeology works the same way. You need specific techniques to carefully brush away the layers of conditioning without damaging the authentic nature buried beneath. George Gurdjieff gave us the first essential tool: rigorous self-observation without judgment or change. This isn't self-improvement, it's self-study. For the next week, simply observe your automatic responses without trying to modify them. When you catch yourself pleasing, people-pleasing, don't stop, just notice. When you observe your perfectionist tendencies, don't judge, just watch. When you see your emotional patterns, don't fix, just observe. Set random alarms throughout your day. When they go off, ask yourself, what program is running right now? What am I trying to achieve with my current behavior? What am I trying to avoid? Don't change anything. Just collect data about your own psychological operating system. Carl Jung understood that we can only find our authentic self by reclaiming the parts we've disowned. Your shadow contains not just your negative traits, but all the authentic qualities you learned to suppress because they were deemed unacceptable. Your buried anger might be your authentic power. Your hidden selfishness might be your healthy boundaries. Your suppressed weirdness might be your creative genius. Make a list of the qualities you judge most harshly in others. These judgments often point to disowned aspects of yourself. If someone's arrogance triggers you, explore where you've suppressed your own healthy confidence. If someone's emotional expression annoys you, investigate where you've learned to hide your own feelings. If someone's authenticity threatens you, examine where you've sacrificed your own genuineness for acceptance. Friedrich Nietzsche taught us to excavate our inherited values and distinguish them from our authentic values. Most of your beliefs about success, relationships, morality, and meaning weren't consciously chosen. They were absorbed from your family system, culture, and formative experiences. For each major area of your life, career, relationships, finances, creativity, spirituality, ask yourself, what do I believe is important here? Where did this belief come from? If I had never been taught this value, what would feel genuinely important to me? This isn't about rejecting all inherited values, but about distinguishing between what you've absorbed and what you've authentically chosen. Your body holds the memory of your authentic nature before your mind learns to override it. Your authentic self has a different breathing pattern than your adaptive self. It has different posture, different gestures, different ways of moving through space. It feels different in your chest, your belly, your throat. Throughout your day, notice the physical sensations that accompany different emotional states and behaviors. When you're people-pleasing, where do you feel tension in your body? When you're being authentic, what shifts in your breathing, your posture, your energy? Your body will teach you to distinguish between genuine responses and programmed reactions. Your authentic nature is often most visible in your early childhood, before heavy conditioning sets in. But instead of just remembering, you need to actively reconnect with those qualities in the present time. Identify 3 qualities you expressed naturally as a young child that you've since learned to suppress. Maybe you were wildly creative, deeply sensitive, or naturally rebellious. Now ask, how can I express this quality in age-appropriate ways in my current life? Not childishly, but with the authentic energy of that original impulse. Your closest relationships reveal both your adaptive patterns and glimpses of your authentic nature. Pay attention to when you feel most yourself with others and when you feel most like you're performing. Notice which people in your life see and appreciate parts of you that others miss. These relationships often provide mirrors for authentic aspects of yourself that you've learned to hide. Also notice which relationships require you to constantly manage your image or suppress your genuine responses. These reveal your adaptive patterns. Your authentic self has a different energy signature than your adaptive self. Authentic activities and expressions tend to energize you, even when they're challenging. Adaptive behaviors tend to drain you, even when they're successful. For 1 week, track your energy levels in relation to different activities, conversations, and behaviors. What genuinely energizes you versus what you think should energize you? What drains you despite appearing successful or appropriate? Your energy is often a more reliable guide to authenticity than your thoughts or social feedback. Here's your final challenge. Choose one small way to express your authentic nature this week that you've been avoiding because it feels risky, inappropriate, or different from your usual persona. Maybe it's expressing a genuine opinion you usually keep to yourself. Maybe it's pursuing an interest you've dismissed as impractical. Maybe it's setting a boundary you've been afraid to establish. This isn't a destination, it's a lifelong practice. Authenticity isn't something you achieve once and maintain forever. It's something you choose moment by moment, relationship by relationship, decision by decision. It's the ongoing work of distinguishing between your genuine responses and your programmed reactions. But let me be honest about what this work requires. It demands the courage to disappoint people who prefer your false self. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood by those who've never done their own inner work. It asks you to risk rejection, judgment, and the loss of relationships that were built on your adaptive persona rather than your authentic nature. But the reward is extraordinary. You get to meet yourself. You get to know the person you've always been beneath all the layers of conditioning. You get to experience the relief of no longer splitting your energy between who you are and who you pretend to be. You get to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than mutual performance. You get to pursue goals that emerge from your authentic desires rather than inherited programming. This is the work of a lifetime, the excavation of your own authentic nature from beneath the archaeological layers of who you learn to be. It's the most important work you can do because everything else in your life, your relationships, your career, your creativity, your contribution to the world, flows from this foundation. If this video has stirred something in you, if you feel the call to begin your own existential audit, then subscribe to this channel for more depth psychology content. Share this video with someone who's ready to question their own psychological programming. And most importantly, choose one archaeological tool from today's session and begin using it immediately. The world doesn't need another perfectly adapted person. It needs your authentic nature, raw, real, and unapologetically yourself. The question isn't whether you're ready to meet yourself. The question is whether you're brave enough to begin the excavation. Your authentic self is waiting beneath all the layers. I've been patient. It's been persistent. It's been calling to you through your dissatisfaction, your restlessness, your sense that something is missing. Today, you can finally answer that call. The dig begins now.